Hi, welcome to the Defeating the Germans screencast by Truly Barnett and Sinead Scott. The Battle of Stalingrad. In July 1942, Hitler suddenly wanted to take over the city of Stalingrad. He wanted to capture it because it was Stalin's city and because it symbolized the conflict between two leaders. Throughout September, October, and early November, German troops captured street by street and sometimes house by house to take the city. Since September, the Soviets had been planning an attack called Operation Uranus on the German Sixth Army. They built up a massive force around Stalingrad to encircle the army. By November 24th, the Soviet had completely encircled the city, thereby cutting off the army's supplies. Rather than retreating back, Hitler wanted to stay in Stalingrad and stand fast. A man named Hermann Göring, the head of the German Air Force, told Hitler that the army could be supplied with airdrops. This made Hitler's decision stronger. In the beginning of January 1943, the Soviets had begun to assault German forces. Despite being in a bad situation, the Germans stayed strong and fought the Soviets for almost a week. On January 15th of 1943, the Soviets had begun to defeat the German forces. By January 33rd, all of the German forces in the city surrendered. The battle had costed both sides an immense amount of soldiers and money. Many Germans had died in the battle, and many of them became prisoners. However, the Soviets' losses were even bigger. They lost about 500,000 people during the battle. Despite the massive Soviet losses, Stalingrad turned the balance of war in favor of the Soviet Union. After, Soviet forces began an assault that wouldn't stop until April 1945, which was when the war had ended. The Battle of the Atlantic. The Battle of the Atlantic was against the British and the Germans. The British had shipping lanes that the Germans wanted to take over. The battle had four phases. The first phase was between September 1939 and June 1940. The German submarines operated only in the waters of Great Britain. The second phase was from June 1940 to April 1941. German forces stopped the flow of supplies in the eastern Atlantic. The third phase was from April to December in 1941. The German submarines extended their patrols into the center and western parts of the Atlantic. The last phase was after December 1941. The German forces started to operate off the coast of the United States. In 1942, the Germans had suffered great losses on the Allied shipping. In early 1943, German forces had made enough ships and submarines to cover their losses. Germany was making 15 submarines per month. This made the Germans stronger and harder to fight. In the meantime, British code breakers started to work harder and became better at breaking German codes. This was them allowing them to reroute Allied ships out of danger. A new bomber was invented called the B-42 Liberator bomber. It was an enemy for the German submarines. In May 1943, the Germans had released and realized that they had lost the war and withdrew the remains of the German fleet from the region. The German retreat in the east. The collapse of Stalingrad caused the weakening of the German position.
In the summer of 1943, the German army was planning an attack on the Soviets of Kursk. The Germans thought the attack would slow down the Soviets, but the attack ended up in a fortification program. When the Germans were unable to travel in harsh weather conditions, they had to halt the attack. The Battle of Kursk was one of the largest battles fought in history. The Germans deployed more than 400,000 men, 9,000 artillery pieces, and 3,000 tanks. The Soviets, however, about 1 million soldiers, 13,000 artillery pieces, and 3,275 tanks. In the east, the Soviets were the death blow to the German forces. The Soviets had forced the Germans off the Russian soil and into Ukraine in October of 1943. The defensive side of the Germans became weak because of the Soviets' military presence. Thank you for listening to our presentation about the Battle of Stalingrad, the Battle of the Atlantic, and finally, the German retreat in the east.